The verse just before the spirit of error verse may be of help here. It's 1 John 4:5. The context of that passage is about those who deny that Messiah Jesus came in flesh. Let's hear that part. They are from the world, therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. So the spirit of error is like a call out to the world, attracting those who are not from God. On the other hand, the spirit of truth calls out to those who know God, who are desiring truth. Let's consider what makes someone a false teacher. Jesus gave a warning in Matthew 23. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. In the next section, I'm going to shorten a teacher who operates out of the spirit of error to simply a false teacher. I'm not talking about a teacher who has mistaken doctrines. This is a teacher with the wrong spirit. So, I'm going to fill in some details based on inferences from the 1 John passage I read before and these words of Jesus. A false teacher is one who causes 3 kinds of damage. First, a false teacher disrupts the relationship between the students and God. 2, a false teacher hinders growth. And 3, a false teacher promotes and spreads the same wrong spirit in others. Let's start with the first one. The false teacher disrupts a proper relationship. The spirit of error operates out of one's pride. Pride makes you into a needy creature. You draw energy from others. You seek their admiration or their approval. You want it. You are invigorated when they bend to your will. You may be caught up in the ego thrill of being respected and desired by others, or you are trapped by an addiction to propping yourself up at the expense of others. Humility is key. Jesus didn't achieve all he did because of his selfish desire to be loved and respected. His was absolute humility and trust in what his Father was doing through him. It's no coincidence that his point about calling others teachers was followed by a warning about being humble. The first shall be last. The teacher who is of the world, partaking in the spirit of error, is not humble. He injects himself into the place that should be occupied by our Father in heaven. He blocks our view. He occludes God's light. The student, then, comes to depend on the teacher, unconsciously confusing him with God. The admiration and praise which should solely be directed to God gets siphoned off and absorbed by the false teacher. The teacher's pride needs the attention. There's something broken in the prideful person, and they know it at some level, but they've opted for distraction and avoidance as a way to overcome their inner pain, as opposed to opting for repentance. The false teacher is therefore needy. The students who swoon over and praise him, they provide that reinforcement, saving him from the truth that he's doing more harm than good. The teacher cannot help but interfere in what should be a beautiful process of students discovering God and his truth. And that's the second damage. By imposing himself in the process, making demands, maybe using guilt or other pressures, the false teacher creates a new and defective path of growth. The goal isn't for the students to become whole. Well, the teacher may believe that the student's success is the goal, But if the teacher needs the ego boost, that goal will be tainted. The teacher's neediness is being served at the student's expense. A tree on a cliff where the wind constantly blows in one direction will grow tipped to the side. A tree growing through a chain-link fence will curl and gnarl around the metal. Likewise, the student under this tutelage cannot grow naturally. Their understanding can be distorted, sometimes in dangerous ways. Their motivations move away from knowing God, and they morph into pleasing or placating the teacher. On the other hand, the teacher with the spirit of truth activates the searching and seeking soul. That teacher doesn't need the approval of the students. He has nothing to gain by applying undue pressure based on his own will. The goal is that the students become whole. Thus, a teacher whose pride is causing the spirit of error to flourish, that teacher will subvert and damage the student's progress. Certainly a student could see through it and realize not to partake in the spirit, but, well, that's difficult. Which brings me to the third damage. If you are driven by pride, burying the truth of your sin and your faults is like salvation. Well, it feels like salvation. If you're driven by pride, you will reach out to draw in excitement and distractions. When you can drown out the conscience, it feels like you're free. It feels great. Temporarily. That's why it's so tempting. Therefore, the wrong that is at work in the teacher will instinctively encourage the wrong in the students. It has to. One can't achieve constant pride puffing without participants. It's kind of like a team sport. The prideful person feeds off those who go along with it, and it's a powerful narcotic. It's how wrong creeps into organizations and grows unchecked. One day you wake up and discover you have a ministry, like the one of Ravi Zacharias, where effectively hero worship and having a purpose and a paycheck is more important than truth and the destructive consequences of sin. You can think of it sort of like an infection. The spirit present in the teacher spreads to those who respond to it, whichever kind of spirit it is. When a teacher speaks out of abundance of the spirit of truth, his hearers are drawn to respond in kind, and that response will be inward. It will involve understanding and peace. The fire and energy in their lives will come from within. But when a teacher speaks out of the spirit of error, his hearers are drawn to the teacher. It's an external pressure. It can take many forms. Often it's admiration, respect, and praise, which is awakened and encouraged in the learners. They direct it to the leader, and he slurps it up as confirmation that he is really something special. It's a cycle. It doesn't have to be admiration, though. There are various ways to suck energy out of others. Some teachers can manipulate quite effectively, using guilt, for example. Being disruptive, overbearing, and confusing to students can cause them some turmoil, some mixed feelings and uncertainty, especially if they are feeling that way about someone who is supposed to be spiritual and godly. That is a bad place to be, because when things get confusing and upsetting, the heart gets uneasy. And, as is the nature of things, when someone is upset, they naturally seek out something to fix it. They are pushed into a state of need. And that's the hook. The teacher who happens to be the source of the problem is right there, promising the answer. And the result? The students become dependent. Inwardly, they are resentful, and that is a source of pain, a pain of the conscience, because resentment is wrong. Constant resentment means constant inner discomfort. And that pain, it's a weapon to be used against you, twisted like a knife. The teacher who is steeped in the spirit of error, he benefits when the people's hearts are not at rest. And the teacher will instinctively, maybe not deliberately or knowingly, but he will instinctively do things that perpetuate the unrest. See, he needs his flock to need him. The pain that these kinds of teachers evoke, that pain should be quietly dealt with and resolved in an inner room. That fake guilt and all the resentment and anger, if left uncorrected, that stuff can ruin you and make you very needy. And then you're primed for the fake salvation that is being offered to you. The spirit of error is a hammer that breaks the bond with our Creator and then offers to fill the void with all manner of exciting and emotional pursuits. And know that those pursuits can look on the surface like noble pursuits, but if they are used to distract us, to make us feel righteous, then they are feeding our pride. They ultimately work against us, keeping us oblivious to the real truth, the truth of our unresolved sin. So what am I getting at? How does this connect to doctrine, which seems to come up fairly often in this podcast, somehow? I'm suggesting a way to understand good and evil, right and wrong, the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. I'm suggesting a way to understand those things such that it makes sense of what you might see around you. How can it be that someone who by every conceivable measure is seeking God with all their heart and mind and is clearly being transformed from within to the image of his or her exalted King? How can that be if they are clearly wrong on doctrines A and B? If a theologically inaccurate teacher truly responds to the Spirit of truth, he will seek his Creator's will above his own willful ego. And the Spirit at work in him will not enslave his hearers, but will free them, despite the inaccuracies. He nurtures the Spirit of truth in others by pointing them toward the real teacher. He actively discourages any dependence upon himself. He will not press for conformity or demand loyalty. This teacher, being a model of the Spirit of truth, will likewise not be a slave to authorities who are over him. In fact, if one of his pupils thrives under this kind of spirit, the student may go on to discover truths that even the teacher didn't know, and the student will be free to share it and won't be shamed for it. This teacher should be outspoken about what he believes to be true. I'm not suggesting some fuzzy mindset or that everyone has their own truth. No, there is absolutely absolute truth. The key is that the teacher is a servant, humble. He is a last and not a first. Listen to this short moment from episode 33 with Amanda Dunn.
There's this idea that I grew up with that was pervasive here. I've used the term authoritarianism. Another way I think I could say it is this terrible misunderstanding of what it means to be strong in your faith. I think there's like a local obsession with that here. And there's this idea that being strong in your faith is being rigid and using the Bible like a hammer against anyone who disagrees with you. But I don't think that rigidity and strength are the same thing. I think that truth is rigid, but I think that love is very flexible. And that we are called to walk in truth and grace. It's hard for me every day. But I've learned to ask myself, what can I say if I'm going to say anything that is honoring of God's truth and loving of the person in front of me? And if it can't be both, I'm not sure it's really true.
Oh, I love that. The flexible love part? That's a product of a humble heart. Christian agape love is diametrically opposed to pride because love is patient, kind. It doesn't envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It's not going to squeeze you externally and shove you into some mold. Love won't poke and prod and aggravate you. Love won't fill you with resentment. Love does not excite with or enjoy the benefits of wrongdoing. Love rejoices with the truth. When one speaks from that place out of love with the Spirit of truth, when one shares truth from humility and a real, sincere love for the other person over oneself, then those who are listening for God, they can hear it. The world cannot. There are two spirits, and you will take in and manifest whichever one you respond to. So be awake, discerning, and quiet enough that you can recognize when something is not right. The spirit of error is not the error. It's the spirit that encourages error, distracts from truth, and disrupts God's intent to work directly with each of us. So you may have grown up in a group with quite a few errors. Errors are just part of your life right now. But if you recognize and turn from the spirit of error and focus on the spirit of truth, and you aren't particularly prideful, it's safe to assume you will have less error next year, and even less the year after that. Fortunately, on Judgment Day, it's not going to be a multiple-choice quiz on doctrine. Did I just say doctrines don't matter? Please tell me you're not thinking that. Why on earth am I doing all of this if these things don't matter? Why are people suffering estrangement from friends and family for the sake of truth if these things don't matter? Oh, they matter. But they matter to the degree we can wrap them in love and deal with them from a heart that is at rest, not one seeking approval or victory at the expense of others. Many of you have had these people in your life who you know operate according to the Spirit of truth. Yet at the same time, they are mistaken about significant things. Don't avoid them because they don't have the proper items on their statement of faith. Encourage them. If they indeed are tuned into the Spirit of truth, not the spirit of error, I'm convinced progress will be made for both of you. In fact, it's quite possible that your doctrinal opponent senses the same spirit of truth in you and feels more kinship with you than enmity. That will puzzle them for many, many days. Probably drive them a little nuts, but in a healthy way. Maybe don't think of these opponents as false teachers, but rather mistaken teachers who love the truth and could use a helping hand. It takes time, so be patient and listen. You might learn something too. Theological errors form a shroud of confusion from which many may never emerge. It's especially hard for leaders to let go of their strong ties with their group, ties that often feed their ego and give meaning to their ministry. Many leaders have cultured and sophisticated palates, which make it terribly unpleasant to eat crow. But don't we all?